Welcome, everybody. And yes, thank you for joining us on a kind of, I don't know where you are. Here, it's a little bit of a glum Wednesday afternoon. So I'm glad to have some company. Today's topic is all about career pathway designs, how to support student access, and other kinds of considerations. This topic I'm really excited about, mostly because I do a lot of work now and in my former life around designing career and tech ed pathways and thinking about these considerations about how we make programming accessible for students, how we try to control costs for students for things like participating in clinicals or off campus activities, how we think about labor market information and wages, and how that informs what we want to pursue at our institutions. So I'm glad that you're interested in this, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have some ideas here. I'm not going to try to turn you into labor statistics experts, but I am going to hopefully kind of sharpen your sword when it comes to being just a really savvy advocate for students. So I thought today we would start with just sort of this little kind of waterfall warm-up activity to center us around these two questions. So how do you currently talk to your house students about employment goals? And what are the college resources that you're currently using to help support that conversation? So I'll give you a minute or so to write your answers into the chat, and then don't hit enter until I tell you, and we'll kind of waterfall the answers together. So how do you currently talk to house students about their employment goals, and what are the college resources that you're currently using to support that conversation? Yeah, so I thank you, Elvia and Sarah. I see your answers in the chat, right? So talking to students about kind of what they imagine their future aspirations, right? So typically employment goals are kind of part of a larger vision for one's life, right? Like it's a mechanism for fulfillment, let's say, but also for income and resources. It may have certain kinds of schedule pieces attached to it, right? So depending on what else you imagine in your life, certain occupations lend themselves really well to, say, daytime work, others kind of shift work, right? So that kind of larger picture, and then connecting students to career services. Yeah, and we're going to talk about career services too as one of our items today. And then Sarah, same kind of idea, right? Like working one-on-one and then connecting folks to career services and making use of other resources at the institution like job boards, right? That's great. Yes, Emily, thanks for mentioning the career assessment. Yes, great. And I'm glad that you use the ones at ONET Online and Career One Stop. I'm going to actually point to the products that IDES provides for folks who live in Illinois. Kind of same idea though. Yep. And then career services doing resume help and mock interviews. Yes, right. And often clothing closet kind of things, also sometimes connected to career services if students need those resources. Good. Good. So for today, these are going to be the kinds of things that we're going to look at. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about generally how CTE program pathways are designed. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Carl Perkins Career and Technical Education Grant and how you can use that as a mechanism to kind of improve access for your students who are especially involved in certain kinds of pathways that really do demand things like transportation. So if you're involved in one of those kind of car dependent programs, Perkins may be a mechanism for you. And then again, we're going to talk a little bit about labor market information, just so you can kind of read the leaves of how this is all shaking out. And then we're going to look at things like the need for various occupations, but then also entry wage and median wage and living wage and how that all connects. And then again, looking at career services, both at your institutions and kind of these other free online resources. And then as always, a list of resources at the end of the show. So last week, one of the things we were talking about was economic mobility, and that's definitely going to be one of the hallmarks for CTE pathways. The other hallmark is this first item on the list, purposeful sequencing. So one of the things we're really looking at in terms of CTE pathway design is that students make a progression that ideally has entry points and exit points, so like on ramps and off ramps, so that a student can start with a basic certificate, go out and find employment with that, come back and maybe complete a more advanced certificate, potentially even maybe have the employer kicking in towards the tuition for that more advanced certificate or the associate degree, right? So we try to be really intentional about how we sequence those courses. And that also includes looking at what's going on in the high school and kind of building that pathway so that it's seamless from that point onward. When we talk about access for economic mobility, we generally phrase that more as high skill, high wage, in demand careers. And typically, we try to hit at least two of those three buckets, if not all three. And some occupations don't lend themselves great to one or the other of those, right? Like sometimes there may be a very kind of niche occupation in your region that you specifically train for. Other occupations may have a huge need, but maybe not fantastic hourly rate, right? So we try to make sure as we're looking at high skill, high wage, in demand, that we're doing at least two of those three, if not all three, right? Three is ideal. Two is kind of the bottom line. And then the other things that we look for with pathway design is looking for increases in completion. So again, when we think about like on ramps and off ramps, how are we measuring completion? So students are completing certificates, that stands as completion, but the more we encourage those students to come back and persist and continue to kind of climb that ladder at their occupation in their industry, that does benefit the school, but we also hope that that benefits the student. So as they complete, they ideally increase their wages. And then ultimately, the last feature of pathway design is thinking about how we use data to do continuous improvement. So we want to try to be building programs that are always meeting the needs of employers, but also really providing great economic mobility opportunities for students. So when I talk about purposeful sequencing, there are ways to think about how credentials stack together that I want to just kind of spend a little time showing you today. So in my world, I talk about things as clean stacks and messy stacks. So this is an example of a piece of curriculum that's a clean stack. So when you look in your college catalog and you see a program that maybe at the end here has a CNC engineering technology AAS degree, ideally there are stackable certificates that are those on-ramps and off-ramps on a student's way to that AAS degree. But what you really want to see is that that first basic manufacturing certificate that has 12 hours in it stacks 100% into the CNC technology basic certificate with 21 hours. So there are no lost credits from that 12-hour certificate blending into that 21-hour. It's just adding on those three additional courses to get to that next step. And then similarly, moving to the more advanced certificate, that certificate that's 30 hours absorbs the whole 21 hours that a student would have taken up until then, and then adds those three more classes on to get to the 30 hours. And then if a student wants to come back and do the AAS degree, again, all of those credits that they've already earned stack nice and neatly into that AAS degree. So this is really when we create basic and advanced certificates, what you really want to look for when you're working with students is to make sure that the things we're advising them towards are the things that cleanly stack so that a student doesn't have any credit hours that kind of fall to the side, right? We want to make sure that that clean stack to me is kind of the ideal program you want to make students aware of. However, there are some messy stacks out there. So this is an example of a less clean stack. So we still have basic certificates and advanced certificates, but you can see here the medical office basic certificate has this one course in it, Health 104, that doesn't follow to the more advanced certificates. So that health class is something a student would need to get that basic certificate and go out and start working. But then when they came back and wanted to pursue the more advanced certificate, that course wouldn't count towards that next certificate. The three other courses would, and that's great. But again, you'd have a little bit of course waste there with that first class. And then similarly, if a student completed the advanced office admin and then wanted to come back to do the medical assisting, then here again, too, you see a little bit of course waste where the Health 104 still doesn't come across for that. But also, if you look further down the list, that Health 113 doesn't come across. And the Med 122 doesn't come across. This also has this other course that has several what I'm calling hidden prereqs. So those prereqs don't come from prior curriculum either. They're really things that are very specific to that course. So in this way, it's a little bit messier. You have a little more course waste, and you also have hidden prereqs that need to be explained to students. So these are just sort of kind of two different designs that you may have at your institution. And you may literally have some areas at your institution that are very clean stacking and other areas that are a little bit messy stack. So it's not uncommon to see at a single institution a little bit of both kinds, but it's just something to be aware of as you're working with students. The other thing about sequencing is how career programs think about this concept of work-based learning, which is basically how we move students from learning about work to learning for work. So generally speaking, in the I mean, it says pre-K. I would say, for the most part, I like this graphic, but I would argue career awareness and career exploration can happen in high school, can happen in college as an undecided major, right? This is sort of where you're just kind of learning about what the opportunities are and what a day in the life would kind of look like. And then once you sort of settle on a major, now you're moving more into the blue arrow and the orange arrow around how you learn through work, through practicum, through internships, through specialized coursework, and then finally career training. So like really getting them into those advanced courses, maybe doing things like apprenticeships, right? Kind of clinicals, something where you're really starting to kind of specialize and go more into training for a specific occupation. So when we talk about work-based learning, especially when we talk about that kind of post-secondary clinical apprenticeship kind of idea, there are a lot of moving parts to work-based learning. The number one thing about work-based learning is it tends to happen off campus, which then tends to complicate students' participation because they've got to now figure out how to get where the work-based learning is happening. But still in all, I would argue this is a task worth undertaking. So working with your students to figure out how they're able to participate in work-based learning. And for the most part, here's why. So there was a study done by New America that looked at all of the social capital that is generated by students when they participate in work-based learning. So social capital, like here it says introduction to future employers, right? Like it's really thinking about how those connections students make in industry are going to then benefit them moving into the future. So if they have an internship or they have a clinical experience or an apprenticeship experience and they do a really great job and that employer may want to hire them permanently, that's great. That's a great use of social capital, right? or even if the employer doesn't have an opening to take them in full time, but is willing to then be a reference for them moving forward, a mentor to them moving forward, like all of that kind of social capital is a fantastic resource for students to have. So I would argue well worth the trouble to figure out how we're going to get these students around. And again, I have some ideas about that. Other kinds of things where work-based learning sometimes becomes difficult for students is, again, the location being off campus. The location is pretty much wherever the employer is, which isn't always on an easily accessible route. So this becomes, again, more difficult for students who may not have a vehicle at their immediate disposal. Sometimes too, the schedules or the length of the experience flex a little bit differently than the length of the typical semester. So sometimes juggling school and work-based learning, potentially in addition to existing jobs that students are holding, just becomes a little bit difficult. Sometimes too, what you'll find is there are sequences where one of these kinds of clinical experience or work-based learning experiences is required to complete the degree or the certificate. There are other instances where the work-based learning is happening more as a function of career services, kind of outside of the demands of the program in question. So generally speaking, I like to argue that building it into a course gives students a little bit more support typically. So that's the version that I like. I realize like everybody does it a little bit differently. But I do also think that thinking about ways to incorporate mentorship or to have employers sponsor students, help defray the cost of tuitions or books or supplies or other kinds of things is again kind of another good mechanism when we're trying to figure out how we blend students experiencing homelessness or students in care into this kind of larger work-based learning environment. And then I do also acknowledge that one of the large challenges with work-based learning is either unpaid or low-paid work-based learning opportunities. And that when we engage in that, it creates this kind of persistent inequity, right? So thinking about things like if a student is pursuing nursing and they need to do clinicals as part of that work, that is embedded in a course. So like that's kind of a win there. They are getting credit for it, but they're not getting pay. And those are hours, those unpaid hours where a student could be generating pay, you know, in a job outside the environment. So I feel like students are always kind of having to weigh that value, right? Like the value of getting your RN in time weighed against the money I'm missing out on making immediately because I've got to set aside these many hours doing unpaid work. So generally speaking, I try to encourage designers of said programs to where they're able to make it be a paid opportunity in addition to a credit opportunity. And again, kind of setting a floor, including like how many minimum hours a week. So it's not necessarily worth the trouble, for lack of a better word, if a student is going to an internship, but it's 4 hours a week, but if they have to spend 3 hours doing public transportation to get there, you know, it to and from, it becomes kind of a lot of, again, inequities persist, and a lot of these opportunities that are really meant to kind of create social capital really drain their financial capital at the same time. So here's my big idea for how you defray the cost. And you guys, some of you have heard me sing the praises of the Carl Perkins post-secondary CTE grant before. So, you know, second verse, same as the first. One of the great things about this particular act is it tends to be bipartisan supported. So even when we see shifts in kind of the power dynamics at the federal level, it doesn't usually shake the Perkins funding too much, knock on wood. The current version we're in is called Perkins 5, and it was signed into law in 2018. And one of the things, really the focus here is to create career and technical education programs at the secondary and post-secondary level that are excellent, that are accessible, that serve industry well and also serve students well. So I feel like philosophically, there's just like a really great match between this Perkins grant and the work that we're trying to do as House liaisons. So one of the other things I want to mention is there's what they call a sub-baccalaureate focus, meaning the associate degree programs are eligible, the certificate programs are eligible, but the four-year programs are not eligible for this funding. So this funding really focuses on AAS degrees and certificates at the post-secondary level, and then high school curriculum at the high school level. So there are multiple things that are required in Perkins programs. These are the ones I thought probably resonate the most with the work that we're doing, right? So again, it talks about thinking about how to make students aware and explore careers in ways that are accessible and designed intentionally, right? So here they call it like a systematic framework. So really what we're trying to do in Perkins programs is to make sure that students have opportunities to try out some different career pathways, and with a lot of advising, a lot of support from, say, career services, academic advising, wraparound services, right? Like we want to make sure that students have a good, robust experience and are able to kind of test out some different career paths without it being damaging to their long-term vision. So that's sort of the first piece. The second piece is really an emphasis on skill development, right? Because at the end of their certificate or their associate degree, we want them to be able to go out and get high skill, high wage, in demand sectors or occupations. So that's definitely in there as like a key feature of the Perkins program. And then there are these two other pieces. One is that Perkins encourages colleges to integrate basic skills and general education into their pathways as a means to support the acquisition of career skills. So not so much as these are the 4 gen ed classes you need to take, wait till the end of your time with us and just that'll be your final semester, but instead really thinking about like, this is an English class. It's going to support you in this program, in this nursing program, because you are going to work on communicating with patients, right? Like, so thinking about what are the appropriate places where academic skills can also support those technical skills. And then finally, that ideally the program of study does such a great job doing this that it exceeds the state's expectation for performance. And one of the mechanisms of looking at performance is how special populations perform in the program in terms of credits completed, certificates completed, where they go after they leave your institution, and those kinds of other bucket things. So I'm mentioning special populations because here's the current list of special populations. And you'll notice I kind of bolded items 7 and 8. So foster care involved youth and individuals experiencing homelessness are 2 of the current special populations as of that 2018 Perkins 5 reauthorization. So here is, to me, where your house students are specifically called out as populations of interest to the Perkins folks. So, and you may also have folks that are kind of intersectional here, right? Like you may have students who maybe are out of workforce and also experiencing homelessness, or they may be low income and experiencing homelessness, or they may be single parents and foster care involved youth, right? Like, so it could be kind of a mix of these things also. But again, specifically looking at where House is created to serve foster foster students and also folks experiencing homelessness, this kind of grant is, in my opinion, really looking for your student group. And what's even better than that is the directive from the state is to think about ways to support special populations. And there are a few things to be aware of here about how you can actually use this money. So you'll notice like that first kind of bulky bullet point is you can't directly cut a check to students from the Perkins grant, but you can use funds to provide direct assistance, such as transportation, childcare, textbooks, supplies to students who are members of a special population if you meet these following conditions. So you can see here, if they're in a special population, they're in a career and tech ed program, the assistance you're providing is to address an overwhelming barrier to successful participation. So my example earlier about not having a way to get to their work-based learning, and it's a required element for the program, that I think demonstrates this idea that it's an overwhelming barrier to successful participation. And then again, what Perkins also doesn't want is that if we help a student get to their work-based learning site, but we don't provide any other services to kind of support that student, they're not really interested in that kind of funding, right? Like that's not really the intent. But thinking about all of the robust support that house liaisons provide to students in care or students experiencing homelessness, I feel like that kind of addresses this piece about a larger set of strategies. And then finally, the last piece is that you can't use funds to supplant. So if you already have a way that you're paying for transportation, you can't then use Perkins funds next year and then use those existing transportation funds to do something else. So this really only works if you really haven't been figuring out how to do things like transportation, childcare, textbooks, supplies, and you're looking for a source. This could be for you. And then before I set you loose on your Perkins administrator institution, here are just a few other things you can't use it for. So you can't use this fund to pay for tuition or fees. You can't use it as like student incentives. So getting students to come meet with you and then you give them, a gift card, like you can't use it that way. Or for any kinds of stipends, you can't do that. You also can't do food and beverages. So if you're having a house student meeting and you're catering it, that's going to have to come from another fund. So these things are generally not allowable, but if you are interested in kind of partnering with your Perkins rep, if you haven't already, I would say if you don't know who that is, if you have grant folks on your campus, talk to the grants office. They can probably tell you who is managing Perkins. For sure, your career and technical education deans would be able to tell you who's managing Perkins because they're probably involved in kind of figuring out that budget. So that's honestly where I would start is have a chat. We're pretty much this time of year wrapping up the existing fiscal year, getting ready to start the new fiscal year. If you're not already in the New Year's grant cycle, don't despair. You won't get money right away then, but generally speaking, over time, a lot of the grant managers find that some of the projects they thought they were going to do, that they planned a couple of months ago, by September, October, they're realizing they're not really going to do it. So this to say, sometimes they do have a little bit of money and they're looking for new ideas about how to spend it. So find out who your Perkins administrator is and definitely connect with them. Even if you get nothing this year, I think it's worth continuing to have this conversation and again, talk about the work that you're doing with students experiencing homelessness and students in care and use the words special populations because that will resonate with them. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about labor market information. And again, most of what I'm going to talk about is kind of how you think about local or regional information. And really, some of you may have products at your institutions like Lightcast, it used to be Burning Glass or MC. There's a few other ones, Chimora. And anyway, you may have a data package from a firm where you can actually type in zip codes in your area and it'll pull labor market data for those specific areas. Or same, you could do it by county. I use freely available data, so I'm going to show you what I do, and that's more this kind of larger regional economic footprint. So I'll show you about that. I also have some whole state data for you. And then there is also the national picture, right? So what I'm going to argue though is for this student population, and really for I make this argument really for all of our community colleges, I don't really look so much at what's going on nationally. I feel like generally speaking, our students especially in CTE, tend to kind of stay closer to where the college is oriented. So I like local data as kind of my personal favorite. I do feel like there are some great tools though on the Illinois Department of Employment Security website that look at the whole state and could kind of give you an inkling about what's hot, what's up and coming. So definitely we'll look at a couple of things. So this is pretty much how I like to look at the data is I go to the Illinois Department of Employment Security, IDES website, and I pull the data that's economic development region. So this picture of the state of Illinois that's chopped up into these 10 pieces, those are the economic development regions. So you may already be looking at that and thinking like, oh, okay, I'm in region 7 or I'm in region 9. Like, yeah, so it creates a footprint and then it pulls together for you the occupations and then the projections. So here on the right, you can see like, here is the title of the occupation. And then current data is the 2022 to 2032 outlook. And then it'll give you how many jobs they're projecting will change, what that equates to in terms of the percent. And then it also gives you the average job openings. So where the arrows are is what I like to look at. So I feel like if you only look at one number, you're going to end up potentially giving bad advice. So here's an example, right? Like if we only look at the percent change, let's say, and we look at general and operations managers, the percent change is 0.74%. If we look at advertising and promotions managers, the percent change is 2.38%. So that's got a higher percent change, right? And better than if you look at that first line, total all occupations, the percent change is not quite -1%. So both of these are outperforming the overall all occupations in this economic development region. But I feel like if we look at that number, we're missing the bigger part of the story, which to me is all the way over here at the right. When we look at average annual job openings, general and operations managers has 513 projected annual openings. Advertising and promotions managers has 4 projected openings. So to me, you don't ever just want to look at a single point of data. You want to look at a couple of points of data. And then that'll help you think about like, ooh, like 513, average annual openings in my economic development region, that could be worth pursuing versus 4, right? Like, I don't know that I would be chasing that in my region. And again, when you look at this region by region across the state, these numbers shift around because each part of the state kind of has a different occupational flavor, which again is also why I don't really love using statewide data or national data, kind of for that same reason, right? One of the things, though, that you might have on your website, if you do use one of those data firms, and this is a Lightcast product, on your website where it's featuring a particular occupation. So here it was rad tech. It'll have a widget where you can look at what the earning potential is and how many annual job openings. And what I want to draw your attention to is this arrow down at the bottom. There's a toggle here where it can either be the local view or you can toggle it to the national view. And depending on what the default is, sometimes the default is national, sometimes it's local. If your college uses this product, make sure that you toggle it to local so you can see what's happening locally. Because here we have local on the left and national on the right, and you can see local for this particular occupation is $33 an hour. But 13 job openings a year, right? On the right, if that's the national picture, it's $5 an hour more and it's thousands of jobs more. So if you don't remember to toggle this, you're going to maybe be overestimating kind of what you think the need is and also the hourly rate. So be thinking about that. Typically, if you do have this product, you can also sometimes toggle when you have it go local. Sometimes there's like a little pop-up that happens that'll ask you, do you want to do it by like 50 miles, 100 miles, or do you want to do it by like specific counties or towns or zip codes? So sometimes there's like an extra slicer in there if you want to kind of get even more into the weeds. For state data, back to our good friends at the Illinois Department of Employment Security, they do these kind of one-pager high demand occupations, again, through 2032, and then they cull it by the degree required. So you can see like at the top, it's got like education beyond the bachelor's degree, then bachelor, associate, vocational award, et cetera, kind of all the way down. And then maybe some of these are not surprising. I know the font is really tiny, so I just like pulled these two sections out to look at. So on the left, these are the careers that are under the associate degree bucket on this handout. And then on the right, I put the post-secondary vocational awards, which is basically what we would call like a basic or an advanced certificate, or potentially a non-credit workforce certificate. So these are the different occupations that currently are trending as high demand occupations. The other piece of information on this, again, like visit it in real life, because I know this is really tiny, but it does also have the hourly wages for entry-level workers and more experienced, and then kind of a median. So you can also see a little bit on here about wages, and we'll come back to that idea shortly. Well, shorter than I thought. We're already at wage data. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about like entry wage data, median wage, and living wage, because these are all terms that are going to get kind of thrown around as you're doing this work. So, again, starting with the good people of IDES, and again, you can go and look at that economic development region, that same kind of culling that we looked at for the occupational data itself. And it'll give you those same occupations, and then it'll tell you the mean wage of that occupation, the entry wage, the median, and the experienced wage. And generally speaking, I like to use entry wage as kind of the thing I really want to see be a strong number. But I will sometimes allow myself to be swayed. If the median wage is at the living wage, then I can usually get behind it. So typically, entry wage is the average that I want to say it's the bottom third of wages in any given occupation. And then the median is the dead center. So when you talk about the median, it means half of the jobs pay more and half pay less, right? It's like the dead center. So for entry wage, though, I feel like that's a reasonable estimate of where a student may be starting if they're starting out in that occupation. And then knowing that within a few years in that industry, they would then ideally be hitting that median wage. So that's sort of how I kind of think about that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Bureau, has some guidance about like kind of if you're interested in kind of calculating like if this is the median in your occupation and you know what your current wage is, you could calculate how many years it's going to take you to get to the median. Um, I don't get I don't get into those weeds, but I do use entry wage as sort of my initial kind of interest point in a particular occupation. And then that median wage is sort of the kind of the fallback position if we think that could maybe be a living wage. So that's entry wage and median. This is living wage. So living wage is basically the amount that a full-time worker would need to earn per hour or per year to basically cover all of their basic needs where they live. And I use MIT's living wage calculator to figure this out. So I don't actually sit and figure this out. I go visit the living wage calculator. So the link, sorry, I had to put the link on the upper hand of this slide because this was kind of a lot of information. So this to say, here's an example. When you go to the living wage calculator, you can look at living wage by your state. You can do it by your county. You can also do it based on a variety of household formations. So I typically use one adult as what I'm looking at. But if you're working with a student and you know they have two children, then you can look at still use the living wage calculator. You're still going to plug in your county, and then you'll see it kind of continues to spill after one adult. It's one adult and a child. It's two adults with one working. It's all of these kinds of different permutations. And then these are the categories that MIT looks at when they're figuring out what that number is. So they look at food, childcare, medical, housing, transportation, et cetera, right? So you can see all this stuff. And then that leads them then to the required annual income. And then we break that down into an hourly rate. But you can even see here, if we use Illinois State as the living wage that we're targeting, for some counties, that would be fine. You'd be at living wage, you'd be even probably to the good, right? But other counties, like if you look at the bottom here, so Illinois State required annual income for one adult, no children, that's that first column, is $50,000, 796. But if we're using that number, but your student lives in Will County needs $55,960, right? So they're going to end up short. And then over here on the right, folks in Alexander County, which is the southwesternmost county in the state, those folks as their living wage is 40,620. So what I think the danger there would not be like, oh, hey, we're targeting $50,000 jobs. I think the danger there may more be that like if we won't settle for anything that's at least a $50,000 job and the wages are potentially lower in that area, you may be missing some opportunities for students. So I think what you want to do is kind of look in your county data here at the living wage calculator and use that to kind of help aim your arrow with students to just think about like, what is the required annual income? Okay, so now you're going to get an opportunity to try this all out. So if you use your smartphone, if you have one, I can also drop the link into the chat. There's this QR code over here on the right will take you to the MIT Living Wage Calculator. And then if you select the state of Illinois, it'll provide you with a list of the counties in Illinois, and then pick your college's county. Or if your college is situated amongst a variety of counties, you can either pick the one that the college is situated in, or you can, pick a neighboring county that is sort of interest. And then what I did was I took the earnings information off of this IDES flyer we were just looking at, and then put them here in the middle. So now you can see like clinical lab technologist is $20.86 an hour, computer network support specialist, 24.22 an hour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this to say, what I would like you to do is go ahead and try out the living wage calculator and then it'll identify a number for you about what your hourly living wage is. And let me know which of these occupations would be something that would meet the living wage in your county. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do this. I realize like it's sort of several moving parts. Yeah, and and Elvia, it's too bad. Like PT assistant just missed you, right? It's 2516. It's so close. Yep. And then Sarah, you're having a totally different kind of experience, right? That like if your living wage is a little bit less, some of these would work a little bit better there, right? And so again, like these are things to sort of this exercise is a little bit imperfect because I'm using the figures on this IDES flyer are statewide data, so they're not specific. Like you would need to like use your toggle or look at the IDES data specific to your region, but you get the exercise, right? That like think about what MIT living wage is telling you about what the living wage is in your county, and then think about what are the occupations that really pay closer to that living wage if we're really trying to lift students out of poverty kind of in the long term. And I do think too, sometimes we think about like nursing assistant or medical assistant as sort of like a bridge to an RN. At most institutions, the curriculum isn't that cleanly stacking in those ways, but it could be something where like that may be an occupation that students could work in while they're pursuing their degree, potentially knowing that the end goal is RN, right? So you can also kind of I think those are the conversations to have with students is sort of trading off like short-term, long-term payoffs, and that kind of thing. All right, good job. Good job, folks. So now we're going to do just sort of a quick run through career services. So I feel like you've got some tools now to think about how the curriculum is designed and how the pathway is designed, how the labor market kind of feeds that. And now it's like, all right, great. How do we help the students kind of figure this out? So pretty much at career services, I feel like at most institutions are kind of a mix of these sort of things, right? So this particular list is from Triton College, but I do feel like there are some opportunities that are probably more impactful than other opportunities, right? So, like doing things like a job fair is great if students genuinely like need a little bit of kind of career awareness, maybe make a few connections if they have some more concrete ideas. Like you can use job fairs in a couple of ways depending on where the students' heads are at. I definitely think that things like internships or co-ops are really great. Co-ops are sort of like apprentices where students maybe go to school for like an 8 hour or 8 week module, and then they work with an industry partner and get paid for the next 8 weeks, and then kind of go back and forth between 8 weeks of class, 8 weeks at the internship at the co-op. So, and then as some of you guys mentioned before, this is also a great place to get support for resume writing, cover letter writing, mock interviews, right? Closed closets, that kind of thing. A lot of institutions also use things like there's another tool called Handshake that sometimes manages the listings for full and part-time jobs so that it's kind of an easy one-stop for students to look at those things. And then also, as you guys pointed out, access to online kind of interest or skill inventories to help students figure out what they're good at and then what that matches to. And then if your institution, though, does not have one of those kind of career coach programs, this is something free and again provided by IDES. It's called CIS 360. And you basically set up a free account. So you can just kind of click on this. There is a student login, but I feel like that, you may need to actually have like some kind of larger connection. So if you go just through the resident portal, and then it'll help you set up an account. You can see here's mine. And then it'll give you a survey to take, and then it gives you these kinds of scores, and then gives you careers that would be good fits given the answers to the questionnaire, which was not very long. It was maybe 20 questions, if that. And then you can see here, you can do an export as a PDF if folks want to kind of save it. And the results will tell you wages, but also the education required, which I kind of appreciated. And then also you can see my jobs are not hot jobs, sadly, but there is a category here for if the job is hot in your region, there's like a little flame there. So it's a great free resource. And then another thing they have that I think is good for kind of returning adult students is this other one called My Skills, My Future. And you type into this box here your current or your most recent job, and then it'll match you with occupations that are sort of similar in skills. And then as you go through and kind of click these different, so again, like I typed something in, and then these were the items that it thought I could match well with. And then again, it gives you like, what's the typical wage? What's the kind of education you would need? And then it also, if you click on the job specifically, it tells you ways in which it thinks your skill sets would translate. So I thought that was kind of a good, another free resource for students. And then for the most part, you've seen the IDES resources. I just wanted to put everything kind of in one place for you here. The living wage calculator you saw. And then the other resource I wanted to make you aware of is the good people at ICSPS have a fantastic Perkins special population resource area. And one of the things that they have there is sort of a best practices for retention and recruitment of students who are in special populations, including students experiencing homelessness or students in care. So that's that first link on the resource page. So if you haven't seen that resource yet, for sure, give that a look. I find that super helpful. Okay, so we have 2 minutes. What questions do you have for me? Well, and as always, this is my contact information. So if you think of something, or if you want me to pull some information, just give me a shout. I'm happy to help. Thank you all for joining today. It was good to see so many of you again. Thanks for keeping me company here on a Wednesday afternoon. I hope your summers are treating you well.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Brittany.